Platinum are very much the kings of modern action games, consistently producing high quality content, and Metal Gear Rising is no exception to this. It's a lean mean fighting machine of a game, and I don't just say that because Raiden is a literal lean mean fighting machine. But something being a good game is not enough to get it a what went right video. No, I instead like to highlight exceptional design. And there's one particular aspect of Metal Gear Rising that really stood out to me, and that was how it handled its final boss. And since I'm going to be talking about the final boss, let me give you an
obvious spoiler alert.
Now that's over and done with, let's rock.
What went right? Metal Gear Rising. Who's the boss?
Yes, the topic of this video is the final boss, Senator Armstrong, and the way the game uses contrast and tricks to make him feel like a really powerful and epic boss. So, to begin with, let's look at his design. Armstrong is just a guy in a suit with glasses. He has nanomachines that can give him a kind of mechanical look, but unlike the prior human bosses, he is lacking any fancy weapons or armour. The fact that he fights in a raw physical manner without relying on any gimmicks like these makes him seem that much more powerful. And speaking of previous bosses, there's actually two final bosses to the game. Prior to the fight with Armstrong himself, we fight him inside a gigantic Metal Gear. Except for the very first boss of the game, all the bosses before this were human or wolf-sized, i.e. a lot smaller and a similar size to Raiden. So now we fight this boss that is enormous by comparison, and we take it down. And then this regular looking, much smaller in scale guy steps up for a fight and starts kicking Raiden's ass. The direct contrast in scale between these two bosses that we fight one after another makes the latter appear much stronger. This isn't actually the first time the game uses this trick. As I mentioned, the first boss of the game was bigger as well, as we fought another, admittedly smaller to the final bosses, Metal Gear. The boss that followed this up was the introduction of Jetstream Sam, a kind of rival to Raiden for the game. So, after taking out a big robot, we fight just a samurai guy, much smaller in scale, and to put it gently, it's not a fight that Raiden wins. This necessitates Raiden getting a cyborg body upgrade that is used for the rest of the game as a clear power up for him. But this isn't the last we see of Sam. The penultimate level is a showdown with him, that this time you emerge victorious from. This is used as a clear way of indicating how much stronger Raiden has become over the course of the game. And then, despite all this power, Armstrong promptly beats him down and breaks his sword. It does the same thing with another boss. Blade Wolf is an earlier boss who, after being beaten, joins up with Raiden, and Armstrong takes him out off screen with nary a hair out of place prior to Raiden showing up. It is using his characters and bosses as another way of showing Armstrong's strength by comparison. So far, everything I've talked about with Armstrong has actually been about other characters or stuff that happens in cutscenes. But unsurprisingly, given I think so highly of the boss, there's gameplay elements as well that make him feel so powerful. So far, I've talked about it as you fight the Metal Gear, then cutscenes, then fight with Armstrong. But there's actually a kind of warm-up to the fight, and that's where the first gameplay point comes in. As I said before, Armstrong breaks Raiden's sword. So, for this warm-up part, we fight him in a disempowered state, using only our punches and kicks, i.e. matching Armstrong's fighting style. And he totally outclasses and overpowers us on this equal footing. This is especially highlighted by some very clever use of QuickTime events. Now in most action games, QuickTime events are used as a way of building up the player character and making the player feel powerful by doing some crazy epic stuff. And up till now, Metal Gear Rising has been no exception to this. But here, it's different. These QuickTime events have the player mash away at the attack button for a furious flurry of fists that take off just 0.1% of health, and we see Armstrong looking totally unfazed to this attack. It's very clever and effective to use quick time events in this unconventional manner to disempower the player. Given I've been going on about how much more powerful Armstrong is than Raiden, the obvious question would be, so how do you actually fight and beat this guy? The answer to that is that the game gives you a new weapon upgrade, courtesy of a new sword, that allows you to stand up to the guy, and this sword is definitely an upgrade. What's interesting is that to illustrate how much of an upgrade it is, you can actually use this sword throughout the game during a New Game Plus playthrough, and you can feel how much better it is compared to the regular weapon you had been using during your first playthrough. This gives you personal and practical experience of the weapon to really appreciate how much that upgrade was needed to fight Armstrong. Something else I really appreciate as a mathematician is the game's clever use of numbers for this battle. Every boss of the game, other than Armstrong, logically has a 100% health bar, but Armstrong is different. He has a health bar of 200%, making him seem immediately comparatively stronger than every other boss you fought so far. What I liked about this was Platinum's restraint in only using his number increase for one instance to really emphasize Armstrong's power. I appreciate this restraint because what I found is that a lot of RPGs fail at this kind of restraint, because they'll do stuff like give you 500 experience points instead of 5 in the early battles. But if you increase everything, it just becomes the standard level and becomes totally meaningless. By Platinum only using this trick once, it becomes something remarkable and meaningful. The final point I want to talk about isn't actually exclusive to Armstrong, and instead applies to every boss of the game, but it's something I just couldn't leave out of the video, and that is the way Platinum uses music in his boss battles. He uses kind of cheesy over-the-top power metal that is so awesome, and for the most part they keep it instrumental. I say for the most part because the vocals kick in to intensify the more epic parts of the battle, and it certainly pulls that off. Well, thanks for watching, and
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
oh, okay. Well, if you say so.